how did you get to New York? I know a little bit about that, but how did you get to New York?
How did I get to New York? So I actually tried to move here in 2020. When I sold my first book in 2019, and as I was saying to you, that was the first time I had any money at all in my life. And so I had wanted to be in New York for a while, having spent like short work trips here. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to go to New York for 3 months and see if it's, if I fit in, if it sits well. And if that does go well, I'm going to try and move here permanently. But I arrived on February 20th of 2020. So that was, a bad time to arrive to New York. Maybe it was a little earlier than that, but certainly I remember the date that I left was March 17th.
God.
And yeah, so I'd been here for a while, like for like maybe a month or so. And that's like when I was just like dating a bunch because I had been recently single before that period. And so I was like, I'm going to go to New York and date everybody, which I did for 3 weeks and then COVID. So yeah, that had happened and my desires had been thwarted. And then basically when things opened up again, I started to like incline back in this direction. And I started spending more and more time here. And even though I was still based in London, I would come over for a couple of months at a time or a couple of weeks at a time. And eventually I just thought if I don't try it, then I'm going to think about it for the rest of my life. I was at a bit of a crossroads. I was 32-ish and I was in a relationship. And so there was this moment of like, okay, do I want to be in this relationship and maybe live with my partner and stay in London and commit to this life? Or do I want to go to New York and see what that is like? And so, yeah, I ended up coming.
Where are you from?
I'm from Waterford, Ireland. And so I was there until I was 25. And then I lived in London I was there until I was 23 and then lived in London for 10 years. So yeah, those are the two places.
Waterford, Ireland.
Waterford, yeah.
Tell me about that. Tell me about your hometown.
Oh, it's great. It's really awesome. You should come.
I'd love to.
It's lovely. It's quite small. It's like 25,000-ish people. And it's the oldest city in Ireland.
Really?
As everybody will tell you when you're there. They're big into the Viking history. It's another big tourist attraction. It's gorgeous. It's like, it's ancient. It has a bunch of these like Viking towers still, and it's like on the water on a very beautiful river, and it's coastal, there's a lot of beaches, and it's small. So like I was really excited to leave it because, any small town is a little stifling, and especially if you have artistic ambitions or just like you're super social like I am. So I was excited to leave it, but now I really love it and kind of I'm obsessed with it. And I write, both of my books have been set at least in part in Waterford, which I think is, obviously kind of a way of me trying to still be connected to it, even though I don't live there, and probably, well, not that I'll never live there again, but certainly not in my immediate term. And yeah, Waterford is like, for its size, disproportionately very thriving artistically. So has a really great theater scene. My dad is a playwright, so he was, a big part of this in the 80s and 90s. And theater and music are like really healthy scenes there. And so I had, it was a very culturally rich upbringing. Yeah.
Did you always have a sense that you were a writer from the time you were young?
Yeah, I did. And I think, in a way that I probably wouldn't have had if my dad wasn't a writer, and therefore you could like see it as a possible reality. Or like, as an example of because my dad isn't famous or anything. And I feel like if I didn't have him as a role model, then probably my perception of being a writer would be like, like being a pop star is like, that's a thing for other people and is a kind of fantasy career. But because my dad, he made enough to get by kind of, and sometimes had to do other jobs that weren't writing to get by, which is obviously very usual for a writer. It was just a more realistic ambition than I think I would have seen it as otherwise. So yeah, when I was, 10, 11, 12, I knew that I was good at writing, and I knew that it made me happy. And also I was kind of an awkward and shy kid, but also maybe not shy, but I was anxious socially, but I was also very fascinated by other people. So that was like a funny confluence of things, because I kind of wanted to know everything about everyone that I met, but I didn't feel able to engage with them properly or to like learn about them as I wanted to. And so I do think reading and writing were like a response to that feeling of like, I want to think and know about people, and I don't feel quite able to do that in person. And here's another world that I can sort of try to do that within. Yeah.
What about writing? You just mentioned some of this, but how did you know that writing resonated so deeply with you? Was it just the act of creating other worlds, fiction, something that just kind of blew your mind, stimulated your mind? Do you remember what it was like to begin the momentum towards a career and interest in writing to that level?
I don't remember being like really good at it or anything. There wasn't a moment in my childhood where I was like, wow, I'm really killing this. But but I think I just loved reading so much that it was like, well, if I could do that, then that would be the most impressive and wonderful thing that a person could do, because I felt so comforted by reading. And it was such a, because I felt so uncomfortable and anxious in life. And I found reading to be really the only transportative thing that I could access as a kid. As an adult, there's all sorts of ways to distract yourself. You can like sleep with people or drink or exercise, or if you're a better person than I am. But there's like a lot of different options for somebody who finds life uncomfortable for an adult. But when I was a kid, I didn't know of any except for reading, and it really was very effective for me. So I think in a way I was just like, that's the best thing I could be doing. And then in terms of like when I kind of thought, oh, it might actually be a real thing I could do with my life, I got into writing poetry, and I thought this is a big money spinner. No, but I think that was the first time I started submitting it places and won some competitions when I was a teenager, and I think that was the first time I was like, oh, I have something that not everyone has, and it was like enough encouragement for me to keep going and to try other kinds of writing. Yeah.
What was that thing, do you think?
What thing did I have?
Yeah.
I think a lot of it boils down to like interest, honestly. Like a lot of it's, when you really talk to people, it's like kind of amazing how many people are not that interested in that much. Or
that's true.
Yeah. And I think when I was writing those poems, I don't mean to be like, oh, I'm so sensitive and like more so than other people, but I definitely, and again, this is not a good or bad thing, but I definitely thought about everything I was experiencing and feeling with, more intensity than a lot of other kids I knew at the time. And I didn't, and I liked that I did that. I found it interesting to consider feelings and to try and describe the things I was feeling in precise language and to convey exactly what I was feeling. And, it's like, because especially at that age, like everything you're feeling is so alarming and alien that committing it to writing was like one way to kind of stratify or to like categorize or, to make things a little more clear and like linear for myself. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think in terms of like what I had, I don't think it was like talent. I think it was just some sort of attraction to examining those things. Yeah.
Do you remember the books at that time in your life that really captivated you? I don't know if you have a clarity on that, but
yeah, there's a couple that were like that were the big moments that I clearly remember. So the first one I would say, and so a lot of them, because obviously the things that impact you the most are kind of the ones that break through your child's consciousness and you're maybe, that you maybe shouldn't be reading yet. And like seeing movies you shouldn't see yet. And so the first one that I really remember was that I read The Virgin Suicides when I was like 11. And do you know that book? So it's like a Jeffrey Eugene Nides novel.
I know the name, remind me.
And it's a movie as well that Sofia Coppola directed.
Yes.
And so that the plot of that book is that it's kind of collectively narrated by these neighborhood boys who are obsessed with these sisters in their neighborhood. And they're sort of in this eternal, that they're speaking as adult narrators, but they're kind of in this eternal adolescence of being in unrequited love with these girls from their youth. And it's like very beautiful and very sad and strange novel, but a lot of it is this kind of acute yearning that I was very familiar with. Even as a small kid, I had these big feelings, and and I thought feelings were really important, and not everybody does think that. And so it was kind of impactful to read this book that took like adolescent yearning so seriously, and it's just like a great novel also. And so that was like probably the first adult novel that I read that I was like, oh, there's something going on here that I want to get involved with. That was one. And then like a lot, also just, I was reading, like reading the corrections and stuff like that.
Sure.
That was mostly just extremely pleasurable, but it was so pleasurable that I was like, made me more serious about writing because I liked the idea of being able to give readers pleasure in the way that I was getting it. And then I think like, The third one I would say was in my 20s, in my early 20s, when I was moving to London. I had read I Love Dick by Chris Kraus, and that was impactful, I think, in a more because of its content or its like themes than because I love her writing so much. I do like the writing, but that book is, you know, about like kind of female objection and the kind of humiliation of being in obsessive relationships with men. And I kind of needed to read that at that time because I had been, you know, in these kind of what's the word, like just these very overwhelming romantic situations that had kind of like taken over and not allowed me much space to be a writer, and that kind of helped me move into a new part of my life where I was not so fixated on that side of things. Yeah.
How did you get to London?
I followed a man. So that was pre me moving through that phase. I was in love with this artist, and he was, you know, he wasn't much older. He was just a couple of years older, but he was definitely in a more in a more solid phase of life. Like I didn't go to college, and
really,
I dropped out immediately after starting. Yeah,
no kidding.
Yeah, and so by the time I met him, I think I was like 23, and so I'd been working in, you know, I'd worked in like restaurants and in retail, and at the time I met him, I was just like doing admin in a medical college, and I didn't really know what I was doing, and I wasn't really writing that much, and so then when I met him, he was just kind of inspiring, and you know, he was like, "You should take your writing seriously," and we were in this very intense relationship, but he moved around a lot. He's doing residencies and things like that, but he was mostly based in London. So eventually, I moved there. You know, at the time, I would not have said I'm moving for this person, but that was basically why.
A big part of it.
But also, I was kind of done with Dublin. Like, I never really had a great time there. You know, after I dropped out of college, it was just hard. You know, obviously, it's hard as an 18-year-old to know how to make money or to do anything. So I think I had just had a kind of crappy couple of years in Dublin. I was ready to be somewhere else, and so I was happy to go to London.
Tell me about dropping out of college. How quickly did you know you needed to do that?
I didn't really know. I was just kind of in denial about it for a while. But
where'd you go to school?
Trinity in Dublin.
Yeah.
So I didn't really choose the right things to study. Like I should have studied English, you know, and but I didn't have the way that the system works in Ireland. There's like a point system, and I didn't have quite enough points with my grades to study English because it was in high demand. But I had enough to study various other things. So I was like, I'm going to study film studies because I really like film, and that was fine and good, and I did enjoy that. But you couldn't only do film; you had to match it with another thing. So I also studied French, and I just kind of wasn't that great at it, frankly. And as soon as I realized I was kind of behind and not doing great, I just was panicked, and and my response to the panic was to just stop going to class, which is not, you should go to class if you want to be better at the subject. But honestly, I mean, that's like a fairly basic way of saying it, but in reality, like, I think I just wasn't ready for what was going on. Like I thought I was going to be more than ready because I was quite a precocious teenager, and I was in a band when I was a teenager. So we would like travel, you know, like I was on weekends going to play shows with just me and the girl in the band. And so I felt like I was very much an adult already, but actually I wasn't. And by the time I moved to Dublin, I just wasn't kind of able to be functional, you know, like the stuff that you have to do as an adult to get up every day and eat and take care of yourself didn't seem to come naturally to me, and I just got very overwhelmed. Yeah.
The routines, the discipline, that kind of thing.
I think it's just like, I don't know, I still find this hard in some ways. Like, you know, when you're a kid and there's not really, you don't have to like contemplate what you're doing. Like you have to go to school, and your mom makes you go to school. Yeah. And then as soon as you get into a position where your mind realizes for the first time that nothing actually happens if you don't get out of bed. Yeah. And like nobody's waiting for you to do that. You know, that's actually a quite big thing to realize,
for
and
sure.
A bit dangerous if you're not a very self-motivated person. And I am not historically that. Yeah.
When you dropped out, the length of time between you dropping out and you moving to London was how long? And I'd love to hear about if you were still writing at all at that time.
So yeah, I always had kept the conception of myself as a writer, and I had like definitely each year I had submitted a few things here and there to journals and had things published, you know, like mostly poems, but short essays and things like that as well, just in very small places. But it wasn't top of my list, you know, because as in priority list, because I just had to figure out how I was going to survive, like financially, and just the immediate stuff was more pressing.
Yeah.
So like writing was like, oh, that would be nice, of course, but it's not what I can focus on right now. So the time was about 5-ish years, I think, maybe, yeah, about 5 years. And and like towards the end of my time in Dublin, part of the reason I felt comfortable moving to London and being like, I'm moving to London to try to be a writer, which, I didn't go straight into that being the case, but I did go there thinking I'm going to go to London and take things more seriously, which I did. Part of the reason was that, I'd started to do a little more. So like I had gotten this slightly more stable job, which meant I wasn't like so concerned about money all the time. Gave me enough time to like, I was doing it at the time in Dublin. There was, I'm sure there still is, like a lot of semi kind of spoken word nights, or just like events that had comedy and essays and blah blah blah. And so I was doing some of those with like friends would ask me to do those, and I would usually write a new essay to read at those. So that was kind of like getting me into a rhythm of writing more regularly. So that was sort of the phase I was in when I moved to London. Yeah.
And you said just a minute ago that you went there wanting to take your writing more seriously when you got there.
Yeah.
How did you do that, if you did? Yeah,
I did. A lot of it, again, was like, so this artist that I was with at the time, he was in a way that I don't like completely agree with, but he rightly in some ways was very invested in the idea of like taking yourself seriously, not in a kind of pompous way, but like he would say to me if we were at a party and someone asked me about what I do or what I'm interested or whatever, I would be like, oh, I work in admin. I work in an office. And he would be like, just say that you're a writer, like you should own the fact that that's what you actually do and care, or like care the most about and like are following or whatever. And he, I think before that it was too embarrassing for me almost to admit that I wanted to be that. And he made me a bit sturdier about being like, no, that is who I am. This is what I'm doing. And so anyway, I basically just was a bit more proactive about it. And so like because I was in this sort of art world context, I would do some readings and performance events in galleries, like in visual art galleries who were doing, one-off performances. I started doing that more. And so that meant, kind of opened up what kind of writing I was doing. I never did anything like super experimental, but it definitely led me away from like, rigid essay form into a like more loose, creative nonfiction style. And so I just kind of would try to be involved in that scene. And then also I started pitching newspapers and like webs, back in, it was like when websites were still lucrative. And so I just started writing for like Vice and Dazed and things like that and like pitching those people. And, I really have no idea what it's like now, but at the time it wasn't that hard to get published by those places if you were a competent writer. They paid terribly, but if you had a reasonably contemporary take on a topical thing and you could string a sentence together, it wasn't that hard to start getting published. Yeah.
And how did you create those? It seems like this is a real transition point for you. Of like you're actually, you're getting paid like crap, but you are getting paid.
Yeah, I think that was very significant. The first time I was ever paid, it was like meaningful to me, even though it was like £80, I think, and it was like, and not that I even at that point was like, oh, I can make a living from this, but it was sort of, impactful to be like, okay, well, if I did 10 of those a month, then which is difficult to do, but you know what I mean? Like I could pay my rent with that, and that was a kind of new idea to me, so that felt really good. Yeah.
Did one thing kind of lead to another? I mean,
totally, yeah. I think, and also another thing that's important to say about this time and so like I again don't know how it will go for me now if I was starting out as a 24-year-old, is that Twitter was like so different than it is now, and it was also very good for young writers to get out there because if I wrote, which did happen a handful of times, if I wrote like especially if it was like a pretty short, so like therefore easily shared, like a short, really strong, maybe a little bit either controversial or about something controversial article, and it was well written, and then gets shared by a bunch of editors, and it was just like media Twitter was like a real solid thing in 2016. And because of that, there was this sort of economy of like, okay, I did one really good article that got shared a lot, so now 5 editors are asking me to do another thing, Yeah.
And what were you mostly writing about at this time? I mean, I'm sure it was a broad
like this was
range,
just like
but
whatever, but as in it was mercenary work. You know what I mean? As in I would write about whatever they asked me to. So I mean, sometimes I would pitch things, and well, in fact, I pitched a lot of things because I was trying to get work or whatever. But it wasn't like I was writing, and I mostly was not writing things that were meaningful to me. Like I was also writing things that were meaningful to me, but I was not getting paid for those. So the things that I cared more about, that I thought were good and interesting, and that I was interested in, were the ones that I was doing readings of in these performance events. And then when it came to what I was getting paid for, it was like op-ed style journalism, basically. So it's just like culture journalism, which is totally fine, but like. And I do still now do that, but it's a bit more long form and considered and about things that I care about. Whereas this was a bit more like, it was like very reactive. So you would like get up at 6 a.m. and look at the news and see what had happened and look at your press, like your PR people that sent you some things and go like, what can I have an opinion about today? Like, do I care about any of this? No, but I'm going to pretend that I do. Or not pretend that you do, but like, you're going to create an argument that it's perhaps not like actually that meaningful to you or like that forceful to you because you just want to get the work, Yeah.
It's paid. It's a job.
Yeah. And like, I'm not, I certainly would not relish reading any of those articles now, but also I didn't write anything like immoral or anything. So it's like, I don't feel badly about it.
What were you writing in your spare time for the love of the craft, for the love of the work?
I guess a lot of it was, they were like personal essay-ish things about relationships, really, but I guess in a slightly more esoteric way than that might sound. So like one thing I used to do a lot was I got really into reading medical case studies at some point, and they just struck me as like an interesting form of writing because they're both incredibly intense and also very dry, and I was just like, this is a weird way to write. And so I so like, this is just to give an example of like one of the essays I incorporated like alternately some medical texts with a narrative about a relationship in a way that, made some sort of loose, coherent sense. But it was like, so it was like slightly patchworky, experimental stuff like that. But I would say if I had to like summarize the theme, then a lot of it was about romantic relationships. Just trying to approach that in a sideways way.
Did you at this time have a vision for your life, a major goal of like, one day I'm going to publish a fiction book? Was that conscious?
Like that was always, I mean, if you had said to me even when I was 8, what would you like to be doing? I would say writing novels, but it never seemed like what I would end up doing to me. Like I never thought that I don't mean like, oh, I never thought I could do it, but I just mean it did not feel like that was the path I was on. Partly because I dropped out of college, and anyone young I knew who had published a novel had gone and probably done an MFA as well. And partly just because the kind of writing that I at this point was getting some notice for was nonfiction or journalism. So I would say that like I always wanted that, and that never went away. But probably at the time that I'm describing to you, and I was in London, what seemed more likely to me was that I would be an essay writer. Yeah, which I guess I continue to be as well. Yeah.
So how did that happen?
How did the fiction happen?
How did the novel happen?
So I was doing a reading. And sorry, I realize all my stories start with I was doing reading, but I do actually like, if people ask me for advice for young writers, I do feel like putting on readings is my only advice that I give people, because it's something that you can control and you can do in your community, and it's really fun. And also it's like, you don't have to have access to the big publishers or whatever, But so I was doing this reading in Goldsmiths, the university in London, and somebody who became my agent was in the audience and heard me read this essay. And she approached me afterwards and was like, I really like your work, and asked me to send her a portfolio of what I'd done already, which I did. And she signed me, and that's okay. So yeah, she signed me, and not on the basis of anything in particular, just like we're going to work together on some kind of book, but we don't know what yet. And so initially I started, I was writing, at this point I had the artist that I was going out with, and I had broken up, and I was really heartbroken. And not just about him, but this kind of series of relationships I had where it was just like my whole identity. And I didn't, it was like the single focus of my life to this really crazy but not that unusual, frankly, degree. And I was really sitting in that and thinking about that a lot, and about the idea of like losing your identity in a romantic relationship. And so my agent and I started talking about the idea of a book of essays on that, with that as the kind of broad theme. I started kind of working on that, but it just didn't feel that exciting to me. And like there was a feeling, an atmosphere that I could feel that I wanted to convey with that subject matter, but it wasn't like getting conveyed by essays. And so I was like, I'm going to just try, and like maybe it will not work out, but I'm going to try and convey that feeling another way, which is in fiction. And she was very encouraging of that and thought I would be good at it, and was like, yeah. So she basically, I think if not for her support at that time, I'm not sure I would have pursued it or certainly had the perseverance to keep going for the 3 years that it took me to write it. But it was basically that I felt like the form that I was working in was not sufficient for what I wanted to do at that point. Yeah.
Tell me about how you created it. You said it took you 3 years.
Yeah,
how
was
often
it not
were you working on it?
not like sustained? So it was like I first wrote anything of it in the autumn of 2016, which was because I had gotten like a small grant from an Irish Arts Council of like $2,000 ish, and obviously in London that does not go very far, but so because of that, I was like, okay, you should be smart about this and go somewhere really cheap, and then you can like take 3 months off work and use this money to start writing the book. Or probably, I imagine at the time I delusionally was like to go and write the whole book in 3 months, So I did that, and I left London for 3 months and went to Greece, to Athens, because a friend of a friend had a very cheap apartment that was like $100 a month or something.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I went there, and I didn't do any other work for about 8 or 10 weeks, and just wrote solidly, and got a not inconsiderable amount of the book done that ended up being in the book. And so that was a really nice way to start it. Then I went back to normal life and was like working as usual and continuing to like do the book when I could, which was either like sometimes just like at night when I got back from work, but more typically it would be if I had enough money, I could take like a week or 2 weeks away from my paid work. I would like, I would, a lot of the time I was like visiting friends in like rural locations, or like cat sitting for somebody or whatever, like going anywhere, a place that I could be quiet and away from everyone I knew, and just do the book for 2 weeks. So yeah, it was like that, kind of like in fits and starts like that for about 3 years. Yeah.
Did the book just pour out of you? How do you remember creating the characters, the story? Like, I'm always fascinated by this moment of people creating a work of art like this. How do you remember that being put into existence?
I mean, nothing ever like flows out of me. Like I don't find anything easy. I don't mean that that's easy, but like I'm certainly not somebody who's like, I don't get into a phase where I just can't stop writing. Like it's always hard for me to write because I don't like to work hard. And like, what it actually is that simple. Like it's nothing to do with writing. It's just like, I would much rather be watching a movie right now or with my friends all of the time. And so, like that's the main barrier for me as a writer, as it would be if I were any other career as well. But I think in the case of the first book, it was like part of what attracted me to what it ended up being was like, it had such a simple, not confusing structure, which was a relationship that begins, and there's a relationship and they live together, and then the relationship ends. And I didn't quite know I knew the feeling I wanted the whole thing to have before I knew about the details of it. And so but at least I knew that I had this very simple, any relationship is a relatively knowable arc. Any relationship which is ended is a knowable arc, And so I think because of that, I never had any big angst about like, oh, where is it going, or like confusion about how to approach it. And sometimes I was excited, to be working on it, or like often I was excited to be working on it when I thought it was going well. And sometimes you would get into like a nice flow state, and especially at night, if I was like up late at night writing in bed, I would get into this like rhythm that, again, like I wasn't like I was enjoying it, but I could feel that it was working. But yeah, so sometimes I got into a good rhythm. It never like totally, it always felt like labor to me to get going, but I was always kind of glad to be in it once I did. Yeah.
What was the feeling you wanted to convey?
So initially, because I still have only lived with one person romantically, and the feeling of that, I was very young when I was in that relationship, like 22 or so, and the feeling of like being in this small apartment with somebody who is so inaccessible emotionally, so cold, and you having this like feverish, totally feral need for their approval and for them to love you and to be accepted and loved. And there was just this like malevolent energy that also is mixed into all the mundane stuff about domestic life that was really vivid to me. Even years afterwards, I could like really feel the knife edge of like that tension mixed with all the boring crap of everyday life. And so there was something about where I was like thinking about the domestic as a kind of almost a horror movie, like you're waiting for this person the other shoe to drop with this person who you're trying to convince to love you. So yeah, it was something like that. And then also just the kind of total need for another person to absolve everything else that is inside you, like all the mess that everyone has inside them, and this desire for an external force, which is another person, to like obliterate all that. Like that need was the other sort of component of the atmosphere. Yeah.
Given the lack of natural aptitude for difficult work, I think a lot of people identify with this of just wanting to hang out with your friends or watch a movie or do something other than their work. Were you able to, or did you need to like implement firm habits that helped you along the way to create this massive endeavor? Or was it really just when you felt inspired or you had the energy, you would go back to the
honestly, it was just like
process?
materially influenced, as in like when I had money, I could write it. And when I didn't have money, I had to work for money. So it wasn't anything to do with inspiration or like being moved to write it or anything. I mean, of course you have to be moved enough to want to write it at all. But in terms of like my routine and my schedule, there was no way for me to ensure that I could do the same thing every day, because as a freelance worker, I had to just work whenever I got the work. So yeah, I never had any routine and still don't, even though I could probably have one now, but I just don't work that way. Yeah.
The model for the book seems to be based to some degree, you correct me if I'm wrong, on your own life. Like this was 13 years ago for you. I'm wondering now, looking back at that story you just told, of the feeling you were trying to convey, which I think a lot of people can probably identify with, how you think about that as a 35-year-old, given the time that's elapsed in your life. If you cringe at that, if you're empathetic towards that character or that people who are in that kind of environment.
Yeah, I'm definitely empathetic towards the character. I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, like being 35. There's so many things that, I mean, not even about romantic life, but like there's so many things that someone can tell you, but you don't, it doesn't go in unless you actually experience it.
True.
And there's like, so I'm sure at the time even that I probably logically was like, this is not a good situation, but it just didn't, like the reality wasn't going in because I hadn't experienced enough of life yet. And so there's a part of you which is like, maybe this is what a relationship is like, maybe it is this hard and upsetting to be in love. I don't know, like this is the first time I've done it.
You have nothing to compare it against.
Yeah. And so like a part of me now is just like, how did I, and again, not just with that person, but in general, like why, I was talking with a friend of mine recently about who's 40 and got married a couple of years ago. And, when I hear from my younger female friends now, and they're going out with these awful people and the disrespect they do tolerate is just absolutely wild to me. And I almost can't even talk to them about it because I don't know what to say, because it's just like, well, there's no discussion, like that shouldn't have happened and you shouldn't be around that person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it is, and like, I don't mean that to be patronizing, but I think once you do get out of a certain period of your life, if you're lucky, and you didn't stay with somebody who treats you badly, then the whole thing just starts to seem absolutely insane. And yeah, like there's things that my friends tell me that these guys are saying to them that I just can't imagine a world in which somebody says that to me now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel empathy for it, but also it seems like totally alien to me at this point. Yeah.
I'd love to hear about how this book gets from you finishing it to the really massive success it was and is. And if you think you just hit the bullseye on an experience and hence the popularity of the book that so many people could identify with, I'd love to hear your thoughts on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. So basically when I finished the draft, my agent had been editing it, not continuously, but I would send her, whatever new draft I had every maybe like once or twice a year in those 3 years. And so she had done some editing work on it already, and then she sent it out to the publishers, and probably like 3 or 4 weeks went by and then we got an offer. And so that's like, in the more functional way, that's like how things went. And then, yeah, as I said, it was like, then it was COVID time. And so it came out, my first book came out in March 21. So it was still in Ireland and England, at least. I can't remember what it was like here exactly, but it was still like pretty deep lockdown.
Yeah.
So at first it was just kind of hard, like even though there was a lot of really like overwhelmingly good press, both in the lead up and reviews, but it was very hard to feel the truth of that because it was lockdown. So, I lived on my own and I was looking at this stuff on the computer and was just like, am I successful? I don't, I seem to be crying alone again in my apartment, but I guess I'm successful. And yeah, so it was just like a very surreal time, obviously, for everybody. So I didn't like feel the success of it at all really until, 2022 when things started opening up again and I was able to go out into the world with it a bit. In terms of like why I think people like it, I think I am, because like I always have been so interested in the minutiae of feelings and relationships, romantic and otherwise, and just like how people are with each other. I think like I do describe things quite precisely in a way that is like, I start in a sort of overview and then like laser focus into these emotional vagaries of interactions. And I think for some people, like the thing that people have said, I guess, the most about it is that I'm describing something in material and specific terms that they have experienced but haven't ever articulated to themselves. So yeah, I think it's like something about being quite direct about things that are free floating in a lot of people. Yeah.
Which I think is a lot of what great art does.
Right.
Frankly.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you thought about this, just the timing of its publication. And my understanding is that COVID really exacerbated a lot of domestic turmoil.
Yeah.
And that for people who were just getting out of March 2021 was after a year of basically people, if they were partnered or they were living with someone, like living very intensely with that individual. If that in your mind probably may have contributed to the vividness as the readers were consuming the art of, she's describing what I've kind of just lived through to some degree.
I think like, whether or not people had any direct relationship to what I was describing, the feeling of like claustrophobia in the domestic space, obviously totally was on everyone's mind and everyone had been a bit like traumatized by in that year. Yeah.
The moment when so it's your publisher or your agent who is pitching when the draft was done.
Yeah, my agent sent it, they send it to like 20 publishers and hope that somebody bids on it.
Was that a surreal moment for you? Like you've gone now from being someone who dropped out of college at 18, following an artist to London, scraping by to try to write to survive. And now you have an agent who is successfully pitching a book you put together. Do you remember that time of I don't know, like how you felt at that moment that you had accomplished something incredible?
When she sent it out, I didn't feel anything at all, really. As in, like, I really had no expectations for the book, as in a positive way. Like, I thought somebody will publish it because there were so many small presses in London that I already had relationships with that I was like, even if it's like somebody's home setup, somebody will print this and I can probably give it to some people.
Yeah.
And so I always knew that would be the case. And so I never had like a huge anxiety about it, nobody ever reading it. And so and I also had no expectation that like a big publishing house would buy it. So I didn't have any anxiety or a feeling of like great momentous moment when she sent it out. But when it was bought, it was absolutely insanely surreal. And like as it happened, I was with my dad, and so my dad lives in Ireland and we're very close. And I think so. Like the process, like the first person bid on it when my dad was in London with me. He'd been coming for a visit or whatever, and just as he was getting on the plane, I got my first offer. And it's a kind of it's a slightly long-winded process, so you don't know how it's going to go at that point. But I gotten that when he was there, and then by the time I got the offer that I did eventually take, which was like with a dream publisher, with an editor who was incredibly intelligent and really got the book, all these good things. I was in Dublin, so I could like see my dad that day, and we were both like, as you're saying, he was really there for all my, like all those years where I was really struggling. And also like I frankly was still struggling. Like even though at that point I had a career as a writer, I had really had no money, and like I was really broke. And like I remember my dad always says, and not that like my financial troubles continue to this day, but at least now I have a career and I can like try to scrape by in a slightly more like propulsive way. But my dad always says, like reminds me that the day before I got the first offer, and I was talking about like the kind of offer I was hoping to get or might get, I was like, if I could sell it for like $4,000, then I could afford to leave London and move to some cheaper place, and just like I'll just move out of London because I can't afford to be here anymore. But if I just have that £4,000, I could get a deposit to live in some other place, And I was just like, I just couldn't do it anymore. I was really at the end of my ability to survive in London. And so, it was like pretty amazing timing that at that point, then I did get the first like significant chunk of money I ever made and was able to continue to write properly. Yeah.
If you're comfortable talking about it, like
Sure.
the amount that you got, this is to own the rights to publish the book.
Yeah. So like the British publisher eventually it ended up getting sold to different territories. So like America and then other translations and things like that. And those are all, wildly varying amounts of money. But the British publisher is like my primary publisher, and they make an offer. In my case, they made an offer where they bought my book, but then they also bought a second as yet unwritten book.
Wow.
So then I was like contracted for another one at that point. Yeah.
Was it a significant amount of, you can or can't?
No, I love talking about money.
Okay.
So it was £100,000 for both to cover the two books, which is like really good for a debut novel. It's like, obviously it's good in general, but also for me, like at the time I was making like £12,000 a year, literally. You know what I mean? So it was like, oh, I'm a millionaire now, basically.
Yeah, a stupid amount of money.
Yeah. And it was just like, it was life-changing, completely life-changing. And also it was just like, oh, wow, these people really think the book's going to do something, or else they wouldn't have bothered. They wouldn't have like put that up, Yeah.
And then you also know that for every copy you sell, there's a portion of the book sale you
Not
get?
really.
How does that work?
Not really. So like, if you're very successful, then yes, but a lot of debut authors don't. I eventually did in the UK earn out my advance, as in, so
Yes,
you only get royalties like once you've made them back that money.
The 100K.
So like that kind of just happened recently, and my royalties are not going to be, because the book's been out for 5 years now, so it's not going to be like I'm making a lot of money from it, but I'll get some small trickle of money from it from now on. But yeah, until you earn out, you don't make anything. So that was never going to be like a big source of income for me. Yeah.
I'd love to hear about that transition period from going from making £12,000 a year to suddenly having, I don't know if taxes were taken out immediately, but like many multiples of that now in your bank account.
Yeah. How
that changed you, how that changed your ability to write, your life.
Didn't change any of my like work life at all. Like I still was kind of doing the same, I was still writing in the same way that I always had. The main difference was that I very ill-advisedly started to buy dinner for everyone that I've ever met. I'm not joking. So I would like come to New York and I would go to like nice restaurants in New York, and there would be like 8 people at dinner. I'd be like, I got this, and like,
damn,
I know, it was just ridiculous. I mean, it was really fun to do that. Like that's like great for me. Like as in that's my biggest pleasure is to be able to do that. And like it was, I wouldn't have done it if I couldn't have, and I didn't do it all the time or anything. But like seriously, I was like really doing that a little too much. So that was the primary difference in my life, was more nice restaurants and more buying dinner in the nice restaurants for for my friends.
How did your life change as a public person? I mean, I know you did. It sounds like once people were able to go to public events again, you were in demand. You were giving these public presentations.
Right.
I'd love to hear about that experience.
Yeah, it was really fun. I mean, because I my background had been so much in doing these live events anyway. It felt like, I think a lot of writers who struggle with that stuff, they've come from a background in which they've been totally alone with their writing, and that had never really been the case for me. I'd always been reading in shared public events, so it was quite a natural and like nice situation for me. I mean, it's not totally natural to be the subject of an interview rather than just like sharing your work with people, but I also think, like, I don't know, people get a little uptight, understandably, about how they come off in these things. And I think if you're just like having a normal conversation, then it's nice and it's fun for everybody, including you, So yeah, I really like the level of success I have. Like, if I was able to keep this level of being known, but make a lot more money, that would be ideal.
Yeah.
Like, I would hate the idea of being famous is very horrible to me. And like, I have a couple of friends who are in the entertainment industry who are recognized like pretty much every time we go out, and like, not in any uncontrollable like paparazzi or flocking way, but it is like kind of every time you go to dinner, and that is horrible to me. Like,
what about it is horrible to you? Because I think a lot of people want to get famous.
One of the reasons I really like New York is that I like being, because I'm so intensely social, and I see so much of people that I also then really need to be on my own.
Yes.
And I like being on my own in New York, and I hate the idea of like somebody tweeting, just saw Megan Nolan reading her book in this restaurant. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I just don't like the idea that I would be being observed, I guess. Yeah.
Did you get the sense after you signed and the book started selling that did more opportunities come your way? Obviously, you had the contract, as I understand, was for 2 books.
That's right, yeah.
But did you have additional writing opportunities that were also being sent your way where you felt like this was an inflection point of quote unquote making it as a writer?
Yeah, never like drastically so, because obviously, like, the making a living as a journalist is so difficult compared to even 10 years ago, and especially compared to like 20, 30 years ago. So it was never like, oh great, everything's easy now. But I definitely had like, more prestige publications reaching out to me or open to my pitches or whatever. So I to put it simply, I was no longer writing for Vice and was like now writing for the Financial Times. You know what I mean? Like it was like a step towards a more establishment media and not just like blogging for whatever place would have me. Yeah.
The second book.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear about where the ideas came for its creation, how that happened.
So I think in fact, by the time that we sold the first book, I already had like the idea for this in mind. And it started, I think, it started when I read this nonfiction book by English writer called Gordon Byrne. And he wrote a book called Somebody's Husband, Somebody's Son, which was about a British serial killer called Peter Sutcliffe. And he just had this kind of throwaway line in it about a tabloid journalist approaching Peter Sutcliffe's family, who were working class, and a lot of them with bad alcoholism, and offering to kind of sequester them in this hotel, give them unlimited booze and some kind of financial remuneration, and that will be under the agreement that they will be a source for him on tap, but only him and no other journalist. I think that never actually happened. Like they didn't actually do that, but I was very struck by the idea of like containing this family at this point of extreme crisis in a hotel together, and then like throwing booze at the problem. Anyway, so that was in my head. And then I had also been interested for a very long time about children who commit violent crimes, and I'd read a lot about that for whatever reason over the past like 15 years. And I was interested in trying to think about a family which might lead to a kid who is capable of violence. So yeah, I wrote this story that was about a novel that's about a 10-year-old girl called Lucy, who is suspected of killing another child on their estate in London, like their council estate, which is not, the council estate like project, not like estate like a fancy place. And then the tabloid journalist who tries to sequester her family and like find what's at the heart of this like kind of family of what is considered to be bad apples, who are like Irish immigrants in London and are very troubled and have a history of addiction and all sorts of different things. And so, the novel tries to like, explore each of those family members through the lens of this crime and the journalist investigating it. Yeah.
Did you come to any conclusions about what kind of environment would lead to a 10-year-old child committing
Well, pretty
violence?
much the only absolutely standard one that applies to every child who ever really commits a serious crime. It's not that they're all abused, but there's always pretty much in every like detailed case that I read about, there's some like significant moment either of abuse or of absence in a parent. So like it doesn't mean that a parent has to be like aggressive or actively abusive, but pretty much always there's either that or there's a parental absence of like, and I don't mean necessarily like they're not physically there, but that they're emotionally removed or incapable of relating emotionally to their kid.
Neglect in some capacity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like emotional neglect or active abuse. There's like always some element of one of those two things or both, you know? Yeah.
I know we're getting a little short on time,
Sure.
so I'd love to close out with just a couple more things.
Yeah.
You write for the New Statesman, right?
I do. So I used to have a column, which I quit the column when I started writing my second book, just like I didn't have time to do both, but I still contribute fairly regularly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your life as a writer now, like I'm always curious about the habits that people who produce art are committed to or not. And I know you've talked a little bit about how it has been difficult at times to just sort of like focus yourself and not watch movies, not hang out with friends, and actually do the work. I don't know if there have been things that you found that have helped you when you need to focus, be able to kind of lock in and do the work. I'd love to hear about your habits as they stand now. If you have learned anything, or if it's still just like you're up late at night and you have some energy, and so you write then.
I'm trying to get out of the late at night thing because, you know, it's hard in a way because that's where I wrote a lot of my first book, is just because of, as I was saying, you know, like I would be doing my day job and then that was just the time that I had to do it. So, and then because it did work, you know, like I did write that book, a part of my brain is like, and that's how you write books, you know? But I'm older now. I'm like 10 years older than I was when I started that first book. And so I don't have the same energy as I once did. And also my boyfriend has kids who I help take care of. So like I can't be up until 4 doing stuff, you know?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I've like been trying to get better about trying to keep like an office day, you know, like as in starting at 9 and finishing at 5 because that's the hours that my boyfriend keeps. But I don't have any tips. Like, no, it's as hard as it ever was, if not more. And obviously that partly is just like phone brain or whatever. But I guess that's the only thing that I do that like makes any difference is that I like lock my phone in a drawer when I'm starting work and, you know, don't access it until I'm having lunch, or you know what I mean? Like it's not like in the room with me because I if it was, then I would check it every 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And apart from that, I co-work with my friend Arthur sometimes when it's like I wouldn't do this with like serious creative writing, but you know, in any freelance creative life, there's like a bunch of admin as well. And so if I'm doing that kind of thing or some kinds of journalism, which are not so like emotionally intense or like maybe not so intellectually demanding, then I co-work with my friend Arthur, he's friends with Eli as well. Actually, he's a comedian. And yeah, so like that kind of helps me to just be like in the room with another person and not slack off. Yeah.
We talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but you know, for people who are in New York who love the literary scene, where are the great places to go listen to writers, to meet writers? How do you think about that?
I mean, there's so many good, apart from the actual like establishments. So like we were saying, the Strand always has good stuff on, and so does McNally. But apart from like the actual places, there's a bunch of really good reading series right now. So like there's one my friend Bronwyn does at this really good bar in Fidei called TJ Burns, and that reading series is called Patio. So if you just like look up Patio reading series, and they do, I think it's the first Tuesday of every month, but she has really good taste and it's always like a really fun time and it's a great bar. And yeah, like that's one that I recommend. And another, there's one that goes on in a bar in Crown Heights called Rodeo, called Good Time Girls. But men are welcome also. I think also once a month. And yeah, like both of those are searchable, and those are, as you know, like what I was saying to you, that they're really good readings, but they're also really fun and a place to like socialize and hang out with other writers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Last question I'd love to ask, and I like to close with this question for the people that I meet. But when you think of the word successful, and obviously compared to a lot of the artists who I've met for the show so far, like you clearly have
had objective success with people really enjoying your work to a level that a lot of people I've met just would dream of getting to at some point in their career. When you think of the next, 1 to 2 years of your life or generally in your career, and you think about the word success, what does that word mean to you?
So it's always just kind of meant being like having the resources to be able to continue, it's a pretty basic barrier for me. I feel like if I always say, I never like to, it was really fun when I had a bunch of money. That was great. But like, I didn't need it. And I actually don't miss having more than I need. But what I would like the amount of money that means you don't have to think about money every month. So like, to me, if I was able to keep as I am doing now, keep writing, but having enough that I didn't have to think about where rent was coming from that month, that would be success, or like more successful than I am right now.
Do you feel like that's achievable given your trajectory? And
I think it's just going to go in and out my whole life, and I'm kind of fine with that. Like, I think it's going to be peaks and troughs forever, because that's kind of also just like how people get paid in the publishing industry. Like you get a bunch of money at once and then you might not get anything else for 5 years, and that's just the way it is. And because I don't have like, even though I do like nice restaurants and I like nice clothes, I don't like need those things to be happy, and I don't have those, I don't have like a bunch of money right now, and I still have a very nice life, and I have enough money to like go to the movies and eat a hamburger. So it's not like, I don't need a lot more than I need, if you know what I mean, so I'm kind of fine with that. And like, because as I just said, the way that the system works with like advances and everything, you do tend to just like have fallow periods where you're not going to have anything. And yeah, I am ultimately okay with that. But of course, it will be nice to have a little bit more stability than I have right now.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Megan, great to meet you.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.